Well, thank you very much. Antarctica is changing, and nowhere is it changing more rapidly than on the western Antarctic Peninsula, where it's getting warmer, wetter, and the sea ice is breaking up earlier each year. These changes are having major impacts on the wildlife in the region. And as a penguin biologist specializing in population dynamics, it was one of the highlights of my research career when National Geographic approached me as they prepared their November 2018 feature special on the region. They asked me, well, how many penguins are there in the region? And do we know how their populations have changed? And you can see my answer in the graphic behind me. The Antarctic Adelie penguin, their populations have crashed, even as the more subantarctic Gentoo population has skyrocketed. We know that because on the western Antarctic Peninsula, we can survey these populations the old-fashioned way, accessing colonies by boats and counting nests one by one. But there are some colonies that are too big, too remote, too inaccessible to be monitored this way. In fact, it turns out that the majority of our uncertainty about how many penguins there are stem from colonies like Zavodovsky Island behind me. We can't count individual penguin heads to monitor these populations. So to solve this problem, my lab and several others around the world are pioneering the use of satellite imagery as an alternative method of monitoring these populations. Now, when we're monitoring them from satellites, we're not counting individual penguin nests anymore. Instead, what we're doing is we're using the guano stain, that pinkish red stain you see in the photograph. And it turns out that that guano stain that's left behind at the colony, we can use its area to estimate the number of penguins that are breeding within it. So satellite imagery has radically transformed our ability to monitor penguins, not just the ones that we can access directly, but all around Antarctica. And not just in 1 year, but in every year. In fact, satellite imagery can do one step better, because it turns out that the spatial pattern of the penguins on the landscape, whether it's one big area or they're fragmented across the landscape, that's telling us something important about the health of the colony, whether it's increasing or whether it's declining and may be at risk of critical collapse. So satellite imagery is not just giving us more information, it's actually in many cases giving us better information. So the challenge now becomes not can we access these colonies to survey the populations directly, but how do we possibly deal with the volumes of information that we're now getting? We get tens of thousands of satellite imageries from Antarctica every year. And there just aren't enough penguin biologists in the world to annotate and to interpret all of that satellite imagery. So the key now is in automation, and with help from the National Science Foundation and NASA, and most recently the AI for Earth program, my lab is pioneering the use of computer vision and machine learning to automate the detection of penguin colonies in satellite imagery. One of our big early successes in this arena was our discovery in the Danger Islands of several very, very large Adelie penguin colonies. The Danger Islands is an island chain off the northern tip of the Antarctic Peninsula that is so small, it does not even appear on maps of Antarctica. And yet it turns out there are more Adelie penguins in the Danger Islands than the entire rest of the Antarctic Peninsula combined. And yet the vast majority of these penguins were not known to exist before we discovered them in Landsat imagery, using automated algorithms that would find guano forests in places we never expected it. In response to our discovery, the proposed marine protected area for the western Antarctic Peninsula was expanded by upwards of 2 million hectares to include this important biological hotspot. And it's such a beautiful illustration of how better technology really can lead to better conservation. We can also use satellites to plan expeditions to the region, like we did when we went to the Danger Islands. And that allowed us to deploy another amazing tool for penguin conservation, and that's drones. Drones allow us to map out in extraordinary detail all of the penguins at a colony, and we can count each individual nest. But drones also allow us to reconstruct a three-dimensional model of these colonies, as you can see in the lower left of the screen. And these three-dimensional models allow us to understand how penguin colonies are responding to the landscape terrain, but also how over hundreds or thousands of years of occupation, penguins are actually shaping the islands on which they live. The threats that face penguins are as urgent as they've ever been. But with machine learning and computer vision, drones and satellite imagery, we have the capacity to monitor their populations and respond to threats like never before. I'm super excited to see where technology will take penguin conservation over the next decade, and now I hope you're excited as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Heather. That was terrific. So next, we have a pair of explorers who work side by side in the same lab, looking at life in the deep sea, or what Bob Ballard likes to remind us can be called the final frontier. Please welcome marine ecologist Whitney Goodell and ocean conservation ecologist Jonatha Giddens.
So I'm an ocean ecologist, and I study the deep sea. What I love about ecology is that it's not a study of things, but a study of relationships within a system. And a deep perspective of ecology also looks at the relationship between people and nature. And I developed this perspective because when I grew up, I would draw everything that I learned about at school. Every subject had a journal, and I would stay up sometimes all night illustrating the pages. And through drawing, I learned to see nature as a whole and not something with just little parts that are subtractable. Because in a drawing, things make sense in relation to everything else. And so I believe in the tradition of the early naturalists that art is a partner in the scientific exploration of the deep sea.
I'm Whitney Goodell. I'm a marine ecologist and a National Geographic Fellow with Exploration Technology Labs. Something that I hear a lot, and I've actually already heard it a couple times this week from some of you probably, is, oh, you work with the ocean. I always wanted to be a marine biologist when I was a kid. I, on the other hand, when I was 5 years old, I told my family on a trip to Hawaii, we were heading to the beach and sorting out the day's activities, and I told my family I didn't want to snorkel. The ocean was this unknown place. I didn't know what was below the surface, and I didn't want to go snorkeling around in the unknown, which is kind of an ironic start to my career and my character. But it really begs the question, what else don't we know, and how is that limiting us? The deep sea. You've heard it before, we know more about the surface of the moon or the surface of Mars than we do about the bottom of the ocean. The deep sea is a huge unknown.
The deep sea is the Earth's last frontier. It's often pictured as a desolate place so remote that it might as well be another planet. But the ocean makes up 99% of the living space on this planet, and only 5% of the deep sea has been explored. So we do not know our own home. Up until relatively recently, the challenge had been, well, how do we actually get there? So it was not even 100 years ago that naturalist Beebe and engineer Barton devised the Bathysphere, a 2-ton ball of steel that they crawled inside and went a half a mile deep down into the bottom of the ocean off of Bermuda. But imagery and photography had not advanced enough at that time to take pictures there. So what Beebe did is he called on a telephone line up to the surface to artist Bosselman on the surface. And as he peered out of the portholes in the deep, she was up there drawing and painting these creatures that he described as he discovered this area. So while technology took the two men down to the bottom of the ocean, it was art that brought the deep sea into the hearts and minds of people. Now, with the Deep Ocean Dropcam, developed by National Geographic Exploration Technology Lab, the deep sea is in reach like never before. It's, instead of a 2-ton ball of steel, it's just bigger than a basketball, and it goes down to the surface. It goes from the surface down to the bottom of the ocean and takes video footage, high-definition video footage of the seafloor. So here we're seeing a 6-gill shark down at 900 meters under crushing pressures. This is far, far below diving depths. Under crushing pressures and in perpetual darkness until the Dropcam illuminates the scene. One more back. So how it's programmed to record for a number of hours. Well, we had a video, but it's not playing. Anyways, imagine. So it's a program to record. There it is. Okay. Still imagine. So it records, and then when it's done recording, it pops up it releases its weight, pops up to the surface, and then sends a chirp over VHF radio where we can use an antenna and locate where it is, and thereby image the deep like never before.
And because this technology now comes in travel size, it can go all over the world. So we actually have video footage, like what you saw a couple slides ago, from all of these points on the globe, and this is growing. But these cameras really open up opportunities they open up the doors to opportunistic deployments. So if a ship is going somewhere and they're doing research off that ship, well, great, let's get some cameras on there, throw them overboard, let's see what's down there. And so this is really helping us build a spatial understanding of where things live. But it's really cool that we can take it one step further and we can start exploring why do things live where they live. So in order to explore that, we pull in data, we pull in different kinds of data like habitat data and sea surface temperature or ocean chemistry, and we can start layering on that information over what we already have, over our points. And so we start with our points, then we can look at spatial things like how far away is it from different habitats like trenches or plateaus? Is it near spreading ridges? What's the sea surface temperature? Does that matter? What's the ocean chemistry, phosphate concentrations, nitrate? So we can start looking at all of this information that already exists. We can layer it on and start really understanding the differences between each of these places that we have video footage. And by that, we can really start exploring the relationships between these things.
So with the video footage that you saw, in a process of annotation, which is identifying and counting the species present, I construct biodiversity indices so that we can map biodiversity in the deep sea. And with the environmental variables that Whitney showed, I can model the relationship between biodiversity and its environment so that we can better understand and inform management of these systems based on science. But the process of discovery does not stop there. This is from a recent expedition to the Seychelles where we were collecting imagery of the seafloor, but I was also using imagination to sense my relationship with the ocean in deep time. And these are the types of transformative experiences that I want to share from these places. So as scientists and explorers, we often get to go to these places that are remote and wild and beautiful, and not that many people get to go there. And I want everybody to feel connected to the ocean as a thing of beauty that they're a part of. And so I think that going forward, we can bridge art and science and technology to together not only go further, but also bring back the awe and wonder that we find. So please follow us into the deep, and if there's anybody also interested in incorporating science into your, art into your science, science into your art, please reach out. I'd love to speak with you.
So the deep sea really is our big unknown. And this, how can we protect something? How can we properly protect something that we don't know? The Earth is changing really fast, and we are not letting excuses like it's hard to get there, it's hard to study. We're not letting that stop us from learning about this place that makes up well over half of the Earth. So exploration and analysis really provide us the information necessary to start understanding these things and really start building what we need to move forward. It's going to take critical action and appropriately designed management in order to conserve this part of our Earth. For ocean conservation, we really need to collect, connect, and protect. Thank you guys so much.
Great stuff. Thank you, Whitney. Thank you, Jonatha. Our final speaker uses artificial intelligence to catalog bioacoustics in species to learn more about biodiversity. Please welcome Holger Klinck.
Hi, I'm exploring nature by eavesdropping, and what I would like to do today is to present a few highlights of projects we're currently working on. First, I would like to take you south to the Central American rainforest, which you can see behind me. And this is what the rainforest sounds like during the night. It's very much driven by the vocalizations, in this case, of insects, and we can visualize the soundscape to make more sense of it. Let me briefly talk you through what you're seeing here. So on the x-axis, we have the time, in this case, 4 days of continuous data we collected in Panama. On the y-axis, we have the frequency or the pitch of the sound. And then color-coded, you can see the intensity of the sound signals we are recording. So in this specific case, we have during the day 1 cicada species, which makes a real loud noise. And during the night, we have 10 cricket species, which are calling a lot. But the species or the family of animals we are mainly interested in are Katydids. There are about 100 different species of them in the area we're working at. And these are grasshopper-like insects, which are mimicking leaves. You can see they come in various shapes and sizes, and they play a really important role in that ecosystem. A lot of animals, including many of the 80 bat species we have there, but there are even monkeys which specialize on Katydid as their primary food source. So we also call them nature's popcorn. That's really what it comes down to. And we believe that by monitoring Katydid richness, as well as the abundance and distribution of Katydids, that is a really good indication for us how well a rainforest ecosystem is doing. And we're using acoustics to obtaining this kind of information. Now I would like to take you even further south. And first I want to show you what the Katydid sounds like. Katydids produce sounds which are most often not audible to us because they're in ultrasonic frequency range, but we can manipulate the sound to make it audible to you. So you have 2 dominant sound sources here. The higher frequency pitch sound, this one, that is an echolocating bat who tries to find a Katydid to eat it. And then the lower frequency sound, which you hear, this one, this is a Katydid, a male Katydid trying to attract a female. So in collaboration with National Geographic and also Microsoft, we are developing machine learning tools which allow us to extract these calls and species ID Katydids from our long-term acoustic data sets we're collecting in the tropics. So now I'm going to take you even a little bit further south. This is the Antarctic ice shield. I spent a lot of time down there doing my PhD, and I can tell you if you're standing on the ice, there's not a whole lot going on, maybe the occasional penguin. But listen to what happens when you put an underwater microphone, which we call a hydrophone, underwater. And this is what it sounds like. And in my opinion, this is one of the most amazing soundscapes we have on Earth. These are vocalizations produced by pinnipeds, primarily in this case Weddell seals and leopard seals, which I used to study during my PhD. Marine mammals make a lot of noises underwater, and sound travels very efficiently in the water. So really, passive acoustics is a go-to tool for us to monitor abundance distribution and also migration of marine mammals, including the endangered ones in the ocean. Now, I would like to bring it back to the temperate regions. I'm at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, so naturally I listen to a lot of birds as well. Birds are terrific indicators for ecosystem health, but they're also challenging. It's a taxonomically very diverse group of animals. There are over 10,000 species in the world, and a lot of them produce a variety of vocalizations. Listen to this guy. This is a bird which you can find right now in your backyard here in the DC area. It's a brown thrasher. And this species alone is known to produce over 1,000 different sound types. So you can imagine that makes our automated acoustic analysis a little bit more challenging. They also have a tendency to call on top of each other. This is a very short snippet of sound I recorded in Sapsakawut in Ithaca, where my laboratory is. And in this case, we have 6 passerine species vocalizing at the same time during a dawn chorus. And what you can see in here is that a lot of their vocalizations overlap in time and frequency. And that's a real challenge for us to tease this really complex soundscape apart and figure out what species are present at a certain location. But using, again, AI and deep learning methods, we have made really great strides in cracking that nut. We're working on a project which is called BirdNet, and we're currently training models which are able to differentiate 1,000 bird species, primarily North American species, acoustically. And moving forward, we want to include more Central and South American species in this analysis to bring this tool into the regions where we have time-critical conservation effort. Thank you. This, by the way, is a Weddell seal, so one of those species you heard vocalizing earlier.
That was great, Holger. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
We're going to have a quick panel discussion in just a minute, but before we do, I have a question for you.
Sure.
So how exactly do Katydids vocalize?
So Katydids obviously don't have a vocal tract like we do. What they do is we call it stridulation. So they're rubbing body parts against another. And what they do is they lift up their wings, and on the base of one wing, they have a sharp ridge. And on the base of the second wing, they have a row of knobs. And by rubbing those two against each other, they're producing the stridulation, which causes the wings to vibrate and to produce sound. And it's very interesting also, like they hear, their ears are just below the knee and the front legs. And they're very sensitive to sound intensity, so it's very directional hearing. And what the females do, they can reorient their body and can figure out from which direction the male is calling, and then head it in that direction where the male is actually vocalizing. So it's a little bit like Marco Polo, just with Katydids.
All right, well, with that, why don't we invite our panel to the stage here, if we can. So there were some themes that each of you hit on. And one I want to go to right away, and particularly, Jonatha, what you showed us in terms of art playing a role in how we think about science and exploration. How do we think about the impacts as technology advances in the field of the human role in the field? You want to start us, Jonatha?
Yeah, I think that it's really, the transformation comes on a personal level. It's a personal story that really can connect people and go through this transformation that we need in how we relate with the natural world. And I see that technology is a great tool, and it is a great tool to connect us all, but what really, we need art as a partner in this process to help to kind of grab people and help people to go through these transformative experiences with nature so that they connect and love nature and see ourselves as a part of this thing of beauty. Like it's as another kind of a message, instead of like, do this or you're all gonna die. It's more just like, hey, you know, we're on this beautiful, there's just so much beauty to discover, and kind of have that transformation happen, and then have the technology connect us so that it's not just separate little things here and there, but we have this opportunity to really have a movement with technology connecting us.
And Heather, with your satellite imagery that you're using, you're in extreme environments where you're doing this work, and so there's always been some limitation of how many humans can go into the field. So how do you see this in terms of scale of the research and what we understand? You spoke to a little bit of it in your talk.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I think that technology really expands the umbrella of exploration in a way that I think is sometimes underappreciated, particularly when it comes to supporting people who want to be explorers but can't spend 6, 8, 12 months in Antarctica. I mean, I can find 1 million penguins in the morning and still get my kid off the bus in the afternoon. And that I think really speaks to the power of technology to really grow the community.
So, you know, one of our explorers, Sarah Parkak, of course, she's been here before, and she's really using that satellite technology for archaeology. But what she's done is she's really unleashed, you know, a whole army of citizen scientists who are helping to look at the work and better informing where we go for archaeology. How do you see the role of citizens in this technology that you're using?
Yeah, absolutely. So we created what we call Be a Penguin Detective on a website that we developed. And it turns out that school kids all over the country have really responded to this. And we'll have an entire 5th grade class look for new penguin colonies in satellite imagery. And in fact, we've had brand new emperor penguin colonies that were discovered by citizens out there just exploring because they're interested, and it really gives them an opportunity to do exactly what we're doing when we're looking at our satellite imagery. So it's a great way to scale and to get more eyeballs, but also just to get people really excited.
So Whitney, you talked about the Dropcams, and we're all super excited about what we're seeing from the Dropcams, but you also talked about sort of how we send them on ships or if somebody's going here or whatever. How do you see ultimately scaling this work?
Well, on the deployment side of it, I think that, connecting so that it's not just one team that's got to kind of be doing all of it. We can't be everywhere. We can't be doing all of that. It really allows for sort of expanding out so that we can kind of, with some training, there can be people all over the world that are, if they're connected to expeditions going on, then they can start kind of creating their army or sending off their army of cameras. And really what that allows for is, it allows for, footage, information from a huge network across the globe. Right. It's not just restricted to these tiny areas.
Well, you talked about using sort of layers of information and data to begin to get a picture of our deep sea. You have over 200 explorers here, and as I said, from over 50 countries. How do you see the opportunities for collaborating with just the groups here?
Yeah, that's a great question, because the data layers part is really an important part of exploring these relationships, because sure, you can get video footage of animals, but really what's going to give us this information is how does that relate to other things? And that can be so many different things. The human element is going to be a huge part in understanding not only how things are now, but how they're going to change in the future. So connecting with explorers that can give us information across the globe about different types of, whatever types of information that they are working with, particularly with the human element, whether it's fishing or pollution that's going into rivers, things like that. All of that kind of information can help tell the story of what's going on.
So terrific opportunity for explorers here to connect with you and see how they can become part of that network.
Absolutely.
Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. Holger, I don't really understand how you deploy the technology in the forest. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So we're building very small and inexpensive passive acoustic recorders, which basically just record sound 24/7 to an SD card. So we try to make them as small and inexpensive as possible so we can distribute them to as many people as possible. And especially the work we're doing, for example, in Central Africa, it takes a lot of effort to get into these jungle areas, and we have to carry them all in a backpack, so you want to keep it as light as possible. And then we put them out there and let them record for weeks, months at a time, and then typically recover them and then use machine learning to analyze the data. But moving forward, we're really interested in applying these machine learning algorithms in more real-time application, especially for gunshots, poaching, those kinds of application. It's really important that we get the information to the people who are on the ground very quickly, and that will be the next step for us to apply these methods in a more real-time application.
I spoke in my opening remarks about how many great supporters we have in the audience in addition to explorers. Some have been truly generous with the National Geographic Society, both individuals, corporate partners, Hubbard Council, et cetera. How do you prioritize your areas, and what would you say to some of our supporters if they're interested in helping you scale this work?
Yeah, I mean, a lot is really technology development, and I really want to give a shout out to some of the high-tech industry, which really helps us a lot. So we get support from Microsoft with our AI for Earth grant. We're also working on the BirdNet project with Google, and really it's them helping us to push the science to the next level. So we could not do that ourselves. So really it's this really synergetic collaboration which makes that happen. And the more of these tech companies we can help us out, the better off we will be.
And that was going to be my next question is, how engaged are you with the private sector to bring them in and develop, side-by-side technologies or tools that can help you in the field?
I guess I'll kick things off. So we couldn't do a lot of what we do without working with some of the same tech companies that Holger mentioned. So that includes 360-degree camera technology in the field, all of the support that we've had from Microsoft on the AI for Earth project, just amazing opportunities to go out to Microsoft headquarters and learn from the very best out there. So that's been critical not only for me personally, but also for my students to give them that opportunity. It is, as Holger mentioned, a really nice synergy between conservation and technology and industry all in one.
Yeah, we are partnering with the National Geographic Society Exploration Technology Lab and reaching out to different partners like at MIT Media Lab, AI companies as well, to help try to figure out how to deal with all this this data that we have. Basically is over 35 terabytes of data right now of that video footage. And so we're looking for help in how to kind of pipeline the data to make it a little bit more, a little faster to analyze. So we definitely are looking for partners in that.
Yeah, because you can imagine when you're looking at video footage of the deep ocean, you have to pull data out of that video, so you just have to sit there and watch it. And that takes a long time, so we're working with partners to kind of automate that and kind of streamline that, make that a bit faster.
One of the criticisms of AI, as much as we love advancements in technology, and especially those we can apply in exploration and conservation, is that it's pattern recognition. And how do you deal with this issue of patterns today, and whether they're the patterns they should be or they're just the patterns right now? How do you sort of look at time when you're really dealing with artificial intelligence?
Well, it's kind of quite a controversial, question and an issue. And I guess my feeling is that to the extent that we're able to support conservation, I don't care how it is that we got to that answer, and it might be a bit of a black box. But if we can make really good short-term forecasts that are actually meaningful to policymakers, that's good enough for me, because a lot of what we do in my lab is that kind of action-ready science. And so however we get there, we may not understand exactly how the models work now. We hope to get there, but I think it is improving conservation.
So I couldn't help but notice on your slides, there were numerous mentions of guano detection, also known as penguin poo, of course. And we know that that's the trail often followed to tell us where colonies are. Do you see, with technology, finding other ways forward to uncover where they've been and where they're going?
Absolutely. Well, I always say, we will never have fewer satellites in the sky than we have right now. Like, we will only get more satellites, more resolution, higher repeat times. And so the future is really bright, and all of the work that we do now investing in how to use those new tools will only continue to grow and blossom in the future. So I absolutely am sure that we'll have better sensors more often in the future. We'll just have to see what the technologists develop.
Great. I have a question for Holger, but I do want to remind the audience, we're going to have microphones, and we're going to open it up for some questions in just a moment, so please prepare your questions. So Holger, you started with birds, and you've really kind of doubled down on insects. Can you talk about that and sort of how you see insects as kind of the key?
Yeah, I'm taxonomically agnostic. I mean, a lot of the research I'm doing is actually in the marine domain, still with marine mammals. But I mean, we're facing different challenges in different environments, and depending what your question is, you need to pick the right species, which helps you to answer that question. Katydids are a really great group to work with for many reasons. I mean, they really play that important role in the rainforest. And they're also a little bit easier than the birds are, because typically they only produce one specific call, which is very stereotyped. So from the detection and the classification point of view, it's not as bad of a challenge as birds can be.
Great, great. We're going to open it up to the audience now for questions. And I do want to remind you, we're live streaming, so it's very important, if you can, to wait for the microphone before you ask your question. I think we have one down here in the front. Microphone is coming to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your presentations. They were wonderful. My question is pertaining to the deep sea camera. What is its capability as far as maximum depth? What is the maximum depth that you have accomplished thus far? Is the feedback simultaneous or real life, or is it subsequently that you get the information? And finally, do you have to have a cable or something to bring it down, you know, such a long depths, and then retrieve it?
There are some cameras, and the original models were full ocean depth, and I believe that camera did go very near to full ocean depth. They've since made them smaller. The rating is about 6,000 meters, and that's because that can reach a lot of the ocean floor. Like, we don't need to go to the trenches every single time. It has no cable, and that's what makes it so portable and awesome, is because you can just program it to record for however long, and then with a weight, take it down to the bottom, and then once it is gone through its recording, there's a burn wire that sets it free, and it's buoyant, so it goes up to the surface and then can be retrieved at the surface, and then it's near instantaneous. So we're not streaming up, but you just pick up the camera, go plug it into a computer, and look at your, well, okay, a couple hour download or so, but then you can look at it. And it's near instantaneous.
Other questions?
They're not trolling.
It's stationary, yeah. So it's just thrown over and it sits at the bottom.
The back?
So I wanted to make a suggestion, which is that you tie the acoustic monitoring to these deep cameras, since there's probably limits to what you can detect with those cameras. But I had a nerdier question, which was, I'm particularly interested in coelacanths, and I've heard the suggestion that there's many, many species of coelacanths and we've just not sampling in the right areas. So I was curious if there was any particular project with the cameras looking for coelacanth species.
Sort of. I just came back from the Seychelles on an expedition to the Seychelles. So every time the subs got in the water, we were definitely looking for coelacanths. But it would be more kind of opportunistic. It wasn't like we weren't just setting out to look for coelacanths. But that's a good question. We should go back.
There's an opportunity for someone right there. Other questions? Do you have one in the back there? I'm sorry. Okay. Well, I'll fill the air while we're waiting for one. Did we have one back there? I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, right here. Okay.
You mentioned that you needed help on the AI to analyze the video data from the sea. Could you just briefly mention the type of help you need?
Yeah.
So are you doing pattern recognition, trying to analyze movements of?
Yeah, there's several pieces of that, and we're actually working with a team right now that for a while they've been building this tool that we will be able to use soon, I hope. That there's the step of simple event recognition, right? So is something moving in the frame? And then you can go the next level of then trying to start categorizing things. Maybe not necessarily, species identification. That's still, well, that's very difficult with these animals, even, looking at the footage. But, that really needs to be human eyes at this point, looking at that. But yeah, simple event recognition and starting to categorize, that really will streamline the process quite a bit. And so that's in the works right now.
Sounds like you guys should talk. I think we had a question right behind here. I don't know if the question is still there. Okay. Over here, was it? And this will be our last question.
Hi, thank you. Heather, how much of the land have you surveyed and how much you haven't surveyed, and how many remaining penguin populations is your gut telling you that there are left to be found?
So we've surveyed the entire Antarctic coastline and all the sub-Antarctic islands. We now do that at least annually, but we try and get cloud-free imagery of all of Antarctica's penguin colonies every month, but cloud-free being the key issue there, because many of these areas are absolutely covered in clouds. We continue to find new penguin colonies all the time. So we found a very large population of chinstrap penguins right next to a colony that we had been surveying for decades. And then this last season, we're able to get there with drones, and I estimate something in the order of 10 to 20,000 chinstraps on those islands alone. And increasingly, what we're finding are penguins showing up where the glaciers have retreated, and particularly the gentoo penguin, whose populations are growing, they will seed new colonies. So new colonies are actually being established because of climate change and because of glacial retreat. And so I expect that we'll continue to find these tiny little new colonies popping up over time. So every year we find something new, and as our artificial intelligence, sort of computer vision algorithms get better, no doubt we'll be finding them even faster than before.
I see Jonathan Bailey smiling over here, so I guess that means the panel has brought out all the things we were hoping to cover here. But before we close, I do have one question for the panel. So obviously machines are taking over a lot of life in different places, and what we've been talking about is machines becoming explorers, going into the field. Do we think we might actually have a National Geographic Explorer that's a machine in the future?
Well, I think increasingly we're getting National Geographic Explorers who are programmers, who program those machines, because at the end of the day, somebody had to sit there and make those models work. And again, I think that kind of speaks to, you know, growing the pie for who can contribute to exploration.
Comments?
I think that that kind of overlooks one of the huge values of explorers, which is the ability, the creativity, and the ability to connect with other explorers and other people. I mean, sure, they're really good at going out in the field and doing what they do, but the strength is really that human aspect.
It was a bit of a tee up for that, Whitney. I think one thing we can all agree is that, you know, when machines and humans combine, that's when we're at our best, and that's certainly true when we're out in the field. So thank you, panel. It's been fascinating, and thank you all.
Thank you.